Good morning. It's Friday. We made it to Friday. Congratulations on surviving another week inside of the world, the craziness, the chaos that is the upside down times that we're living inside of. My name is still Dave. Back on the old back patio. Had so much fun hanging out with everybody yesterday. I thought, you know what? Come on back. Let's have a chat. Let's see how everybody's doing on a Friday, how excited people are to have survived yet another week. Are you ready for the weekend? Hello. Oh, man. Someone just finished my book. Thank you for finishing my book. It's so interesting. I am preparing for a New Year book club-esque kind of thing where we're going to take a handful of chapters and for a couple of weeks to start off the year, talk about how to chase down a new year in a fantastic way. And one of the things that I was diving into yesterday and trying to create something that would be something of a like curriculum-based video that you get ahead of a live where we dive into and talk about things was this idea that I'm going to bring up today because I think it's an important topic. There was a chapter in my book where the lie was what worked will work. The things that have worked are the things that will work. And as much as it was written outside of the times that we find ourselves in, I do think that there is practical application for taking inventory of the things that we have previously applied to our life that no longer have application because of how much life has changed. In the book, I talk about the difference in how I approached leadership inside of a corporate environment relative to the kind of leadership that was required inside of a startup entrepreneur kind of environment. But I think that there are so many things in 2020 that we probably have never had to contemplate thinking about differently or had to contemplate doing differently. And the world has begged to differ with that opinion. The way that now the world has changed, there may be some of you that are still waiting for things to just go on back to normal so that you can get back to playing plays out of a playbook that was applicable back in March. And I tend to be one that doesn't actually believe that we're ever going back to something that even resembles what life looked like back in March of this year, but that instead there's likely going to be a brand new playbook that is necessary for all of us to try and adopt if we're going to succeed in a world that is inevitably different now than it was then. Or said another way, I was writing early on in this year about how the events of this epidemic, this pandemic, maybe give us a great opportunity to question in the rush to return to normal, what parts of normal are worth rushing back to. And the idea that we have an opportunity in the circumstances that we find ourselves in the struggle that we find ourselves in, to actually ask, what are the things that we actually want to get back to that are normal in a new normal? Because it's going to now be a choice that all of us ends up having an opportunity to address what parts of normal are the things that we want to have as a part of our life going forward. If we go through this entire thing and just resume life as it was back then without having addressed the things that no longer matter, that no longer serve us, that no longer have a place in our life, man, what a waste of an opportunity for all of us to have done the inventory on what doesn't actually matter anymore. There's something interesting in a conversation I had not terribly long ago with Jay Shetty, where we were talking about suffering. And what's interesting in the human condition is that there are many of us that will choose the suffering that we know because of it being something we are familiar with, rather than pushing away from the suffering that we know for the opportunity to actually create something new because we fear things that are different. And man, if there was ever a time to push against that fear and reframe what the heck we're even doing here and how the heck we're even going to operate our lives and do our lives in a different kind of a way, man, this is the time, right? There's suffering that's happening for every single one of us in real time. And yet, if we choose to stay in it because of the fear of what departing from it might mean, forget about it. We will choose that suffering, and it will come at the expense of what we could have learned, what we could have become, what we could have grown into if we were willing to push ourselves away from something that was familiar for the opportunity to experience something new. It doesn't make it easy, but the things that have tended to act as blocks for me, and maybe for you, are the fear around the unknown, right? The fear of what pursuing something different or new might end up feeling like, because it's disorienting to actually try and do something different. But if you find yourself in struggle, if you find yourself in suffering, and you choose because of the familiarity of it to stay inside of it, then you have chosen to anchor yourself to the struggle or the suffering that you know, instead of facing the fears and the unknown that might exist and pushing into something new for the possibility of having something that feels whole, different, better, a part of you that maybe you would not have otherwise seen if not for the willingness to push away and find out what is on the other side of the fear that you are trying to face. When we were having that conversation, Jane and I were talking about fear. I've talked a little bit about how I've been doing so much therapy around this idea of self. It's been really important for me in a disorienting time to try and reconnect with who I am. And so I found a therapist that specializes in this therapy around knowing who you are so that you can appreciate who you are and the parts of you, the parts of you that show up as helpers. They have roles. And among those things are the emotions that you feel and the feelings that you have and the thoughts that run through your head. The way it was described to me when I got into this therapy was self is the sun. And there are parts that have roles and responsibilities inside of each of us that act as clouds. Yes, is this the therapist you're buying the yacht for? That is correct. Every single time I meet this person, all I can think is I am one therapy session at a time helping buy my guy David a boat. But the analogy that was given is that you are the sun. You are the sun, and the parts that exist inside of you, they're there as helpers often, can sometimes act as clouds. And when you find yourself overwhelmed by emotion, overwhelmed by feeling, overwhelmed by the thoughts that roll inside of your head, sometimes those clouds can block out the sun in a way that maybe makes you forget that the sun itself exists, that maybe has you losing yourself a little bit. And so a big part of the work that I've been doing is to make peace with the feelings, make peace with the thoughts, make peace with the emotions, acknowledge when they show up, and ask what role they're trying to play. And so when fear shows up, when anxiety shows up, rather than believing myself to be fearful, rather than believing myself to be anxious, I'm trying to ask fear, what are you doing here? Anxiety, why have you shown up in my life? And I can tell you, for the sake of anxiety, as a for example, someone said, have you read The Untethered Soul? The Untethered Soul is a book that I have recommended to every person that I run into. I am the weirdo that now in the line at the grocery store, mask on, hey, have you read Untethered Soul? Because that book, in part, is a complement to this therapy where you are the observer of your feelings. You are the observer to your thoughts. And so as you contemplate the possibility that what you have previously been working off of playbook-wise, the things that you've previously done, not being the things that will work going forward, you will inevitably have the parts in your being come in to play roles that say, uh-oh, I have some fear about the possibility of deviating from a previous path. I have some fear about this. I have some anxiety about that. And your job as self is to acknowledge the existence of these parts in a way that lets you ask them why they believe they are here and what role they hope to play in presenting themselves. And so for me, when anxiety shows up, I used to just get anxious. I would spin, it would trigger me, I'd have to go on a long run, all the things. And now as anxiety shows up, the question that I ask is, anxiety, what are you here for? And oftentimes, anxiety has presented itself to represent that I have not yet created enough detail in a part of a plan for a piece of my life that in its ambiguity has presented this anxiety so that I can address that thing that I have not yet addressed. When fear shows up, fear, what are you doing here? Fear is showing up sometimes, and this was a conversation that I had with Jay. Fear is showing up sometimes to act as a catalyst, to push me into something that I have fear for, right? It is the catalyst to try and get me to move away from the suffering that I know. Hello, don't tell me that I'm going to reframe my relationship with fear or with anxiety to something that actually has some gratitude around it because of the role that these pieces play in helping create action that might allow me to write a new playbook, to create a different kind of plan, or maybe reinforce some kind of plan that doesn't currently have enough specificity to create peace, to create calm, to allow that part that thinks it's there to do a role to go back to where it came from and rest until another piece of my life that doesn't yet have enough specificity on a part of my life, asking it then to come back up and let me know, hey, you ought to take a look. As I've been running these long runs, I tend to do these Q&As, and I get a question all the time about how I handle negative emotions. And man, all of us have been presented with so many negative emotions in the last 6 months. I mean, the world is completely different, and so much of processing unconventional, unprecedented times also comes with having to handle negative emotions. And my answer to how I handle negative emotions would have previously been, I try to shut that thing down. I try to mute it. I try to run from it. I try to avoid it. I don't want to have to sit in it. And my answer in the last handful of months has been, I don't do anything with negative emotions, but try to understand why they have presented themselves in my life. And guess what? Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes when you're in the suck, it sucks. And yet, if there's a way for you to recognize that you are not the voice in your head, you're the observer of the voice. You are not the emotion you're feeling. You are the observer to that emotion. You are not the person who is the thing that you're feeling. You're yourself. You're the sun. And these clouds have come in to try and create for you the recognition that action is required, that there is something that you can do in response to them playing a role that they believe is there to serve you, even if it doesn't feel good. And so I just want to encourage you today, if any part of you thinks that you can depend on or lean on the playbook for how life used to look back in March before the world started to change, for how you want to try and thrive in 2021, in December of 2020, in any future part of your life, I'm going to argue that it may not be a thing that is actually going to have application in a world that is different from the one that we previously lived in. It doesn't mean that the way you used to do things was bad. It means that the way things are now requires that we think differently about how we do things going forward. The conditions have changed, so the playbook needs to change. And if you haven't yet considered which pieces of the playbook don't actually serve the world that we live inside of now, or the kind of life that you'd hope to have, this is the time. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let's make a plan that actually recognizes the circumstances that we find ourselves inside of and the people that we'd hope to become. What worked in the past is not going to work in the future. And the idea of pushing into something new is going to inevitably provoke fear. It's inevitably going to provoke anxiety. But those feelings are not who you are. Those feelings are parts that are playing a role to help drive you into the construction of something new, the building of something different. And if you can see them as the gifts that they are attempting to be, you won't feel overwhelmed when you feel anxious. You might, in fact, feel grateful for the breadcrumb trail that this anxiety is affording you to address the thing that has not yet been addressed in your life. Let's go. Come on. It is time for a Friday. I am excited about giving you some more details on the stuff we're going to do at the beginning of the year. I'm on fire for it. I'm excited about it. I hope that you have a fantastic Friday. I hope if at any point today you find yourself feeling overwhelmed at all by the emotions that you experience, by the thoughts that are inside of your head, that maybe you can take a step back, have a seat, maybe in nature, and ask what that emotion is trying to do to actually provoke some change for the better. Because it's not you being anxious. It's not you being scared. It's a part of you that is doing its best to play the role that it believes is going to actually get you to the place you need to go. Have yourself a fantastic Friday.